Yes, you guys are tuned into another episode of the Family Case Files TV show. Now, we are going to have tons and tons and tons of other guests, um, other legal representation, and I'm going to have some co-hosts to actually help me. Well, I want to say help. I mean, I can do the show by myself just fine, but I want to help the community because this is a community project now, and the show belongs to you, the people. So, with that said, let's just continue on with part 3 of Deborah Cross's episode and try to get the show on the road, hot and the deep. All right.
But I went through the paperwork beginning in about 2014 is when I really started to discover, all of the lies and the falsified documents and the healthcare fraud.
Deborah, let me ask a question real quick. When you say the lies and the falsified documents, what specifically are you talking about?
There was an incident. It was an incident in 2006 with my attorney where I decided on the day that they got me to terminate my parental rights to go and search for a medical record for June 1st of 2002. When I couldn't find it, I reapproached my attorney and I asked him directly if they had not used the doctor, and he said that particular doctor would never admit to it. There's much more corruption here. And so then I filed a police report, and that did me no good because they were also, of course, involved.
But as far as I guess what I'm asking is, you actually found medical records, right?
I found where they've been abusing my Medicaid for years when I haven't been there. This one particular agency. And then also I found some falsified documents that were signed. So in 2006, I withdrew from the outpatient treatment process because I was traumatized. And at that point, I'd say about 4 days later, this particular doctor got a treatment provider to sign a document stating that I went back when I never did. So that allowed this agency to continue to abuse my Medicaid for years. They did. And I also feel that this is it's a hard case to talk about because if I was to slip up and say a name, there could be consequences to that. So I'm going to be really careful how I word things.
Okay, so just so I understand it, within the CPS case, there were documents through a mental health provider that stated that you were being treated when you weren't. Is that basically?
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And well, hang on. I want to make sure I'm clear. And then that treatment that they said you were having that you weren't, they were, it was being charged against your Medicaid.
Yes, it was. So here's what, for 13 months prior to my father's death, one of the treatment providers began to abuse my Medicaid. And then from 2006 up until 2016, it looks like it was also abused. So it's a lot. It's a lot of abuse there of a Medicaid program. But initially, what it is was it was a federal taxpayer money scam is what that case was. And then, okay, I'm gonna leave it there for a little bit. I'm going to say that they also documented that entrapment case at an address that I didn't receive until 2007 in a separate county. They documented that entire case. from the time that my children were 1 and 2 years old. I was not at that address when the case began, or it ended. Do you understand that there's a lot of fraud that I feel would be beneficial for like a federal judge to see? I mean, you have to sit and really look at what they did. Was essentially they pretty much made my life a lie.
Deborah,
I would love.
let me ask you this, because if you're talking about treatment that you didn't receive, that they said you did, are we talking about therapy?
Yes.
Okay.
Essentially for.
Then, I mean, with the records, though, that should be pretty easy to prove, because therapists, when you go in on a regular basis for therapy sessions, they take notes and they document when you were there and when you weren't. So it seems like we should be able to go through the records and pretty easily, either the therapy notes are there or they're not.
Right. Which I think that's why it would be beneficial for like for you to sit down and actually look at this, look at what they did clearer. I don't know how much of the case you've seen.
I've pretty much gone through. I mean, I can tell you that I don't have all your case file. There's no way the stack I have.
Yes, but I have it. I have it here. I keep it with me at all times.
Well, Just Julie, who would benefit from there being fraudulent medical files? I mean, is insurance, is this the court validating that she's crazy when she's not?
It's right. It's either, it could be either that. It's either them trying to document that she has a mental illness that isn't there.
Right. That's right.
Or, so to carry on with the theme, so to speak, of her case from the beginning. Or it could also, it could be just flat out Medicaid fraud. It could be this provider who has realized an opportunity, so to speak, that, because it's really just easy to sit back and say, well, who's going to come back and look at this file? Who's going to believe her? I mean, it's very easy to believe that she was doing this therapy. So, yeah, I mean, you could have this provider that is not doing anything but lining his or her own pockets, say this therapy is happening, and that it's going, billing the Medicaid. What's interesting to me, though, is usually in those situations, the department, CPS, usually pays for the therapy. But I know there are certain situations where they will expect the parent to pay for that therapy. So, it could be either one. It could be, trying to continue the theme of the case, or it could just be flat out this individual therapist, committing Medicaid fraud because the opportunity was there.
Right.
Well, do you see more people with, let's say, people having a little bit more wealth being forced to jump through many more hoops to pay for this, pay for that, versus someone who is indigent? And
yes. In fact, it's really frustrating. I don't care how much money you make. If CPS comes into your life and takes your kids away, and the department wants you to do X amount of services, I think that it's beyond frustrating for them to turn around and say, oh, and by the way, you're going to pay for it. So, but yes, there is, at least in Texas, there is a statute, a law that says that if the parents can pay for it, if they have the means to pay for it, they can actually have them do that, as well as, when they appoint an attorney for the child, they can now have the parents pay for that or reimburse the county. You know, so it seems it's curious to me at best when you've got the government, you know, beating on your door, telling you you're a bad parent, you're not doing it right, you need to do it our way. Oh, and by the way, we're taking your kids and, you know, putting them with strangers. We will, you know, practice parental alienation at its finest
Right.
when we have them out of your
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have you do all these services and you're going to pay for it. It's bizarre. It's bizarre.
It is, and in my case, it was the taxpayers who paid for all this. It was
Sure.
the state,
Sure.
and why was it admitted as fraud in 2008? It seems to me like I fell victim to human trafficking or an illegal adoption ring, or I mean, it's wrapped my brain too. And it's taken a lot of supportive people around me to get me through this many years with that kind of an order.
Sure, I bet.
Yeah.
And you're actually, I know this, you're not going to believe it, but you're actually one of the lucky ones that you have family or friends that are around you to support.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I can't even begin to understand, even though I've worked these cases, even though I cannot even begin to understand what it must feel like as a parent to have your children
Angry. I felt a lot of anger.
Sure. And it's justified. I just you know, and the thing is, if you know, they try to do things to make the parent or somebody like you look mentally ill or crazy when you know, sometimes I think, well, you know, darn it, you're making them crazy.
That's right. Yeah.
This has to make you just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you yourself, even as a judge, you could go home and lose sleep over it. That's the kind of case it is. It's a bad one. And in 2008, they were considering giving me back my children, and they sent medical transportation to my apartment to take me to an evaluation, but they never returned them. Instead, they went through with this big spiel and adopted them out instead. So what really did happen to me is what, because I remember the psychiatrist asking me if I was angry, and I said, yes, I am. I mean, I've just had 2 people admit to fraud. Of course I'm angry. But as far as how I've kept my sanity as well, as I've always been pretty religious in my heart, and so that's another thing that's kept me going.
Well, I think
It's
you would
just,
have
it's
to
just
be
wicked.
crazy to say that, no, I'm not angry. I mean, would they just use that instead? That'd be better ammunition.
So my question is could I request a lie detector test? Or, I mean, I think some of these people need to be summoned to a federal court.
I mean, you can certainly request it, but I mean, you can actually go. I mean, there's police referrals everywhere. I mean, you can pay for your own. You could, you know, you could set that up and take care of that yourself. But it's I don't think that would necessarily be the right way to go. I think the better way would be actually getting somebody. You know, and I'm not saying I should do it, but I'm saying, I mean, I do this kind of thing. It's somebody to sit down and it takes time. I mean, you have to go through the entire case file.
Yes.
You have to touch every page. You have to read every line. Because
Right.
we all know the devil's in the details. So you can't just, it's not something you can just peruse your way through. You actually have to read and get down and you know, get your hands dirty and figure out what went wrong, when it went wrong, who did what, who did, you know, and the truth is that, you know, you could very well have a lawsuit against the department, a federal lawsuit.
I do.
It'd be a, you know, a 1983 civil rights violation.
If you're the target of a CPS investigation or lawsuit, it may be time to consider hiring an experienced Child Protective Services defense attorney. A skilled CPS defense attorney can work with you to make sure you understand the allegations against you. Your attorney will explain the entire CPS process, your options within the process, and the pros and cons of each option. Depending on the facts of your case and situation, your attorney will offer his or her opinion of the best and likely outcomes of your case. In some instances, your attorney may want to work with you to create a backup plan or safety net in case your case ends poorly. If you need help, contact an experienced CPS defense attorney in your area.
Child Protective Services does a shocking about-face after spending a year trying to terminate a couple's parental rights, accusing them of medical neglect.
That couple now has all three of their children back and have left the country. Fox 26's Randy Wallace joins us live right now with the exclusive report. Randy.
Melinda, in May of 2015, we told you how Kathy and Ahmed Jiwa found themselves in the crosshairs of Child Protective Services. It was because their son Ali, who was 19 months old at the time, wasn't developing like his twin sister. Even though doctors could not explain why, CPS accused the Jiwas of medical neglect. Court hearing after court hearing, Child Protective Services made its intentions clear when it came to Kathy and Ahmed Jiwa.
They wanted termination.
Even though no doctor could testify what was wrong with little Ali Jiwa, CPS accused the couple of medical neglect and repeatedly threatened to terminate the Jiwa's parental rights. Last June, Kathy Jiwa accused CPS of playing God.
Only God should be allowed to take your kid without you being able to defend yourself. And CPS has turned themselves to God. They're taking people's kids for no reason.
CPS went after the Jiwas with a vengeance. They were threatened with sanctions for talking to me. Last November, CPS even had the parents arrested at the airport in Dallas as they were about to fly to Nigeria to visit a dying relative. That prompted CPS to take the Jiwas' two daughters into protective custody as well.
CPS stood in court under oath and said these children are still, the two girls now, and Ali still, in imminent risk of physical or emotional harm by their parents.
But 6 weeks later, CPS does a complete about-face. The state agency recently filed a notice of non-suit, which completely dismisses the case.
So it was either all a lie, so CPS and the service providers could get the money that they normally do, you know, through the therapists and that sort of stuff, and just harassing this family, or they're hypocrites, meaning the concerns were there this whole year, but at the end of the day, they're like, you know what, send them back to Nigeria. Let it be Nigeria's problem.
Will we ever know?
We'll never know.
Attorney Julie Ketterman practices family law with a focus on CPS cases throughout Houston, Texas. She has been licensed to practice law in the state of Texas since 1999. Ms. Ketterman obtained her BA in criminal justice from the University of Texas at San Antonio in 1995 and her law degree from South Texas College of Law in 1999. She is licensed to practice in both the federal and state district courts. Julie is nationally certified in child welfare law. She handles family law matters throughout Harris, Galveston, Brazoria, and Waller counties. Julie is married to criminal defense attorney and firm member Golan B. Aman. She also has 3 daughters and 2 stepsons.
I understand what they did, but as far as taking it in front of a federal judge, they expect you to act as your own attorney. So that means that I would have to learn all of the, US 28.
Well, wait, what do you mean they expect you to act as your own attorney?
Well, they expect you to know all the codes, and I don't.
I know, but you can. There are civil rights attorneys, so you don't have to do it yourself. Have you looked in your area for any civil rights attorneys?
Who's going to want a case like that?
If there's something there, then, and if you lost your children through through fraud, through misrepresentation, through lies, then yeah, your rights were violated. Your constitutional rights were violated, and there's a case there. I'm just saying that and there's other things. There's other federal suits you can do, whether it's Medicaid fraud, whether it's a RICO action. I mean, there's so much that can be done.
Well, let me ask you something. I'm all about liability, and it seems like lawsuit is one way to go, but it's the system and then the taxpayers who are going to have to deal with this. What about the original offenders, the people who committed the fraud? Are they tracked down? Are they interviewed? Are they? What happens in this situation if she were to sue?
If in a federal action, yes, you hunt down the original offenders, and they are summoned to federal court, and they have to answer for those acts that that they did or that they participated in. So yes, it's. I mean, I have some federal actions pending now, and most of them. I mean, you start from the original CPS investigator, their supervisors, their program directors, and you all the way through the case. So there can be as many as 20, 25, 30 different people that you're suing, because you have to bring them all into the suit. And yes, they have to answer for those acts that they either participated in or at least authorized. So it's not always the easiest thing to do, especially when you're talking about caseworkers in a job that's where they're so transient. But yeah, you basically have to hunt them down and let them know that they've been sued as well.
And what is the process if Deborah were to go and look for a lawyer? It seems like something that would be kind of an intimidating situation. I mean, what's the process? You call lawyers? Do you ask? They do pro bono? I mean, what would you expect to hear? What do you want to hear? etc.
Well, as far as, I mean, I would go online first and literally do a search for lawyers who take on 1983 civil rights federal actions. And there's not a whole lot of them, but they're out there. I mean, I do them here in Texas. They're very paper intensive cases. They're very, they take a while. I mean, you're talking, 3, 4, 5 years. So it's not anything that's going to happen quickly. But it's, so what she basically has to do is call these lawyers, let them know the facts of her case. You need to have the file. You had not just bits and pieces of it. You need to have the entire file. So you can take that to this lawyer and say, here you go. Here's the file. Let's start with that. Now, many lawyers will, they charge different ways. I personally, what I do, if somebody comes to me with a huge case like that, I charge them a certain fee just to review it, to see if there's anything there. You know, if there is something there and we can proceed with that, then, you know, that's kind of taken off the whole bill. But a federal case in and of itself, a 1983 action, I do on contingency basis, you know, but for expenses. I'm sorry?
I've called many attorneys, and they don't want to touch a case that was done through a prescription that was, they don't want to have anything to do with a mental health prescription crime. It seems like because it's, I don't understand why, maybe because it's a complicated litigation or whatever the reasons. I've been turned down already.
Okay, well, and I don't know who you've talked to, but you would need to find somebody specifically that does these federal civil rights violation acts, because it doesn't end up being a mental health case. It ends up being, you know, a civil rights violation. It's just how they violated your civil rights may bring in the mental health issues. So I think that it's more in the presentation. You know, I don't know what you're telling them. I don't know what they're you know, hearing, but I can tell you that they're tough cases. I mean, they're you know, you're asking an attorney to sit down and read all of these files and you know, do all of these things over boxes and boxes of documents. So that's why, you know, you need to find somebody that may charge you a certain amount just to review the case to see if there is anything there. And then if there is anything there, then they take the case on. And this is where, you know, if you found a true a true civil rights lawyer, is they do it on contingency, because if there really is something there, they're not going to charge you up front other than the review. I do these on a contingency basis. If I think it's a good case, they don't pay anything but the expenses to file it. And then if we win at the end of the day, you know, I get my certain percent. If we lose, then I just spent, you know, years of my life fighting a case that didn't win. So that's why you don't take every case. You can't take every case. You know, this also, go ahead.
I think this case also goes back to, like we talked about in the last video, that a good, you know, psychological eval can get very costly, and that's been another part of the problem. But I think that they should pay. I mean, they committed the crime. They should pay for that honest evaluation.
Well, and I understand that, and I understand you're feeling that way, and I agree with you 100%. But we know sitting here that that's not going to happen. If you want to prove something, we all know that you're going to have to go out and find the money and have that psychological yourself. You know, is it fair? No. Is it right? Absolutely not. But is it the reality? Yeah, it is.
What about court orders issued by judges who are now retired? Is there a recycling process, or?
There is. Are you talking about like the gag order or the?
Right.
Yes. Anytime you have a court order, doesn't matter if the judge is retired, if the judge is still sitting, or if the judge is passed, you can always go in and if it's an active order, meaning you're still required to follow that, you can go in and ask that be either set aside or modified. So there's ways to do that. You can, again, in a situation like this, and I hate to say it, you know, for Deborah's situation, but you don't get a court-appointed lawyer for that. That's where our system fails. So you have to find somebody that is willing to do this because it's the right thing to do. And And yes, they can go in and modify that order or have it set aside, depending on the facts of the case.
Well, it would be nice if there was some sort of case registry. You throw your case out there and let lawyers shop for you. But
yeah, I mean, it would, something like that. But, these cases are so convoluted and so, there's so many twists and turns and the lies and the misrepresentations and the fraud and the corruption. It's nauseating. It's nauseating when you look at all these cases. So, when I talked, you've heard me say this before, B, that the monster is too big. So it's so many of these cases are just getting lost in the system because they are so convoluted and they're expensive. And I mean in the sense of time consuming to prosecute these 1983 actions. They're very time intensive and we have to make a living also, and so you can only take on so many of these federal actions at one time.
okay. Well, also, Deborah. So, let me know once again, how many years did you miss out with your children? Because they're grown now, correct?
Since 2007, since they were 10 and 11 in 2007. That's a lot of years.
Okay. Were you able to
Nothing.
follow any of
Nothing.
their life? No parents?
Nothing.
Like that?
Nothing.
You were cut clean away.
No, correct.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yes, and my
Go ahead.
my children are angry too. And then as well, through those years, they were being brainwashed against me. So if you really look at the case, it's child abuse from beginning to ending. It's perfect.
Well, how about that, Judge Julie? For the kids end up becoming adults and they're angry. They know they've been victimized. They know their family were torn apart for
Right.
of money. What are the legal actions they can take?
There is. They can also file a civil rights action because their due process rights to family, I mean, their due process rights were violated as well. They can also, they have attorneys during these suits, so they can go back and they can sue their attorneys for malpractice. They have rights as well. The children have rights as well. So they certainly can go and I've had some. I've had adults who have come to me, who grew up in the system, and it's again they're so convoluted because then you have to go back and get the case file from when they were children, and people have died and people have moved on and that sort of things. But so they're hard cases, but they're important cases. If you can, I almost wish that they're, CPS attorneys or those who work in this field, I almost wish that there was some sort of system where they had to, take maybe one a year or something like that, because they're really important cases. And I think the only way we're going to change things are to go back and show all the wrongs that the kids are suffering through, that families are suffering through. But again, it's just, I don't see that it's going to happen. Probably not in my lifetime. Will the corruption be resolved? But fingers crossed that it will. It'll be resolved. By the time my grandchildren are adults.
Well, would her case, would Deborah's case be stronger if she did a joint lawsuit against the court or lawyer?
If she did a joint lawsuit?
Yeah, is that possible? Because she says her
Like a class action?
Yeah. How many people in class action?
I mean, it can't. I mean, the quick answer is yes. There's always strength in numbers. So the quick answer is yes. But when you're talking about these types of federal actions, they're very fact specific on how these parents, how their due process rights were violated. You can't bring in a group of parents and say all of our rights, due process rights, were violated, so here's a class action. It doesn't work that way. They would have all had to have been violated in the same way, right, so to speak. So I think the better idea, is to get a group of parents who have had, similar, in the same area, similar therapists, similar caseworkers, similar, all of that. And I think a RICO action would be far more beneficial. A RICO, you have to prove that there's basically a conspiracy, that a group of people are, it's racketeering. That's what you're trying to prove. That a group of people work together, for instance, towards the Medicaid fraud, so that they can all make the money. I mean, that's what you would have to, show. So it goes back to, yes, you sit and you read the file and you determine whether there's a civil rights violation, whether there's a RICO action, something along those lines. The problem with the RICO actions is, again, even when you're talking about the medical providers and the therapists and the mental health providers, their contracts come and go, so they come and go. It's hard to find the same therapists, for instance, that have worked with 50 different families, and committed the same type of fraud.
As far as I know, of the children adopted into this home, that there's like 2 other children in the home with that are from a biological mother named Deborah, and I'm not sure if there's any connections, but the rest of the details are seems a little odd to me. That all of the girls' middle names are May. That seems like a control tactic.
That all the names are what? Say that.
Of the 3 girls that have been adopted, the middle name is May, and so, and all of the children are from biological mothers named Deborah. And from what I understand, the adoptive parents can never have their own children, and there's something to do with a towing company they own. Seems like maybe they pulled a lot of state patrol cars. Through the years, I've thought that there's a connection of some sort. My own reason for why they would have done something like that leaned more towards, maybe it was because my name was Deborah somehow, and then why was it admitted as fraud? It's strange.
No, it sounds very strange. I would agree with you.
It is. And I've also had the adoptive mother become extremely She has threatened me on Facebook. I've had to block her more than once.
So you know the adopted parents. I mean, you've talked to them?
I don't know them. I've never talked to her. I've heard a lot about this family because my oldest daughter does talk to my brother, and he has gotten certain details that has just made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I mean, all of the abuse they've been through in the home, the drug abuse, the alcoholism, started making my children fix drinks, hard liquor drinks, from the time they were 5 and 6 years old. I mean, come on, there's no reason for that when they had a perfectly good mother that wanted them.
Sure.
That's a good point. So, Judge Julie, how do we, and I say we, how does someone at least track where their children are going? Is there a way to know ahead of time so you can research the families so that you can rebuttal, an appeal, say choose another family, something, some involvement, some active process a victimized parent can undertake?
No, I wish there was. Unless the children are adopted by a family member or some sort of friend, for the most part, parents don't know who the adoptive parents are. The names are sealed, the adoption sealed, and they do that for this very reason. So moms and dads can't, hunt the kids down or the adopted parents. So the only avenue really is that the children, which has really made it, with all the social media now, it's made it a lot easier for adoptive children. And there's many organizations out there that will help you find your adopted parents, but the really you have to wait and depend on your children. Do they have a name? How young were they when they were adopted? Do they remember you? Do they remember family members? And so many times the children now through Facebook and that sort of thing, they will find family members and they will find, their parents. It's not near as hard as it was years and years ago, to do that. So, unless it happens that way, parents are pretty much, their hands are tied.
But in those situations, those parents are not being kept from a relationship. I'm being kept from a relationship. And my children are now 20 and 21 years old. I mean, this got crazy yesterday.
Well, that's that part of your case is unusual, to say the least. I don't have the answers for why that's still happening. It seems as though your children, as adults, that the only way this order could still be in place is if they wanted it to be in place.
They have nothing to do with it. They have nothing to do with it. They didn't put it on me, and nor do they want it. But somehow they've been beaten down to where they're afraid of it, and I don't blame them. And then of course the brainwashing, that was to keep them from wanting a relationship with me.
Well, I can tell you that as adults, if they don't want a court order keeping you away from them, there are steps they can take as adults to have that order set aside.
I don't believe that they would be able to drop that because of the way that case was done. I really have my doubt. I mean, because Hugh, the attorney that I had in that case, he's now a Superior Court judge in that county, and I don't know.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I'm saying as an adult, a court cannot place an order on, say, me and B to say we can't communicate or talk to each other unless one of us has asked for it.
Right. So right there, they're violating my civil rights.
That is something else I don't get as well. You mentioned something about brainwash. What do the adopting family or the adoptive parents learn about the biological caretakers?
Well, they are supposed to, if the adoption is through the department, they are supposed to get the entire file. The entire CPS file. They're supposed to know everything about the parent that CPS knows. They are also supposed to know everything about the children that CPS knows, because it's supposed to be, full disclosure. In other words, if you have a child that, and I'm not saying in your case, Deborah, but if you have a child that was a victim of sexual abuse, the adoptive parents have a right to know that, so they know as this child gets older, there may be, issues to deal with, in therapy. If you have a child who maybe witnessed, mom murdering dad or vice versa, the adoptive parents have a right to know that. The same thing with the parents. If there are any mental health issues, if there are any major diseases, especially those that are hereditary, the adoptive parents are entitled to that knowledge. So when they say yes to this adoption, it is done with full disclosure of the medical and psychological history of the parents, as much as can be known, and that of the children.
What I know about that case is there's like 1,173 pages of discreditation against me, and all that is all done through a prescription. So what they've done to my children is extremely criminal. Also, to lie to me to get me to terminate my parental rights. I never signed any paperwork that consented for my children to be adopted to these people. I was under the understanding that my children's biological father was getting them. So basically what they did was they played us one against the other to get us both to terminate our parental rights. So they violated both of our parental rights.
I think it's a lot easier to
victimize.
I think it's a lot easier to terminate, both parents' parental rights when they're both fighting, looking dysfunctional. I'm pretty sure that's done on purpose.
Isn't
we're
it?
coming to the closing of the show. So, quick review. Judge Julie, she needs to get this 1983.
It's a civil rights violation cause of action.
Okay. And I want to thank you for coming onto the show, Deborah. Thank you for coming on. And this has been another episode of Family Case Files with me and Judge Julie. Catch you next week.
So many times CPS violates your rights. I can navigate your way through the chaos that is CPS today. You have to have the knowledge. You have to know your rights. This is not the time to hide behind your pride. This is not the time to be afraid. This is your family. This is your children. Pick up the phone and ask for help. I bring families together and I keep families together.